After 3 original trilogy movies, a few sequel appearances, and even his own spin-off adventure, it's safe to say that fans have gotten to know the lovable rogue that is Han Solo pretty well. But there are still more than a few Solo secrets out there that many a Han stan is yet to discover. So I am Gareth, this is What Culture Star Wars, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Han Solo. Oh, and because just about everyone already knows that he was originally going to be a green alien, and Harrison Ford wanted him to be killed off during the original trilogy, you'll be relieved to learn they will not be discussed in the following entries. Number 10, George Lucas wanted to make the Solo movie before Disney bought Lucasfilm. Solo, a Star Wars story, has gone down in history as one of the biggest flops of the Disney Star Wars era, struggling at the box office despite being a pretty solid and fun adventure. It wasn't Disney who first came up with the idea to give this legendary smuggler his own movie though. George Lucas was actually interested in making a Solo film, with the Star Wars creator having a meeting with Kathleen Kennedy and Lawrence Kasdan about that potential project 3 weeks before the House of Mouse bought Lucasfilm in 2012. Kasdan, who helped write the screenplays for both Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back and Episode 6 Return of the Jedi, wasn't really sure if he wanted to write more Star Wars material. But when the idea of doing something with Solo, his favourite character, came up, he jumped at the chance. Even after Disney bought Lucasfilm, they were still up for another Solo adventure, and were happy to let Kasdan work with his son Jonathan to continue writing the script. What followed was the second of Disney's Star Wars stories. Number 9, The Secret Episode 8 The Last Jedi Easter Egg. Speaking of the Disney era of Star Wars movies, Episode 8 The Last Jedi was the only sequel trilogy movie the iconic Han Solo did not pop up in. But he actually sort of did, in a way. Early on in that middle chapter of the latest trilogy, Paige Tico eventually managed to release a ton of bombs from her ship, with these then crashing down onto the First Order dreadnought below. Watch closely just as those bombs begin to fall though, and you'll spot some white Aurebesh writing scribbled on some of them. There's even a smiley face. The bomb closest to the screen for a second or two after Paige hits the big red flashing button actually contains a little nod to Ben Solo's dad. The words "Han says hi" can be found on that explosive object. Now sure, director Rian Johnson may not have been able to work with the great Harrison Ford in this movie, but he still found a way to add a little Han into his film. This secret Solo Easter egg was not the only way that Johnson saluted the icon in Episode 8 of course, as the projection of Luke Skywalker would hand Leia Organa Solo's golden dice before they'd eventually evaporate along with the illusion. Yes, I am not proud of that joke. But speaking of Easter eggs in Star Wars, I want to know right now, what is your favourite Easter egg or cameo in any Star Wars project over the years? Let me know in the comments down below. Number 8, what he got up to after the original trilogy ended. While the average Star Wars fan is likely well aware of what Han Solo got up to throughout the original trilogy and how his time within the galaxy far, far away came to an end in the sequels, how he spent the 3 decades in between those films isn't really as well known. The expanded universe version of events show him getting involved in some quite unexpected situations, more on that later, but his Disney canon history is also just as fascinating. You see, after getting married to Leia Organa, Han would help his pal Chewbacca free the Wookiees of Kashyyyk, who had been enslaved by the Empire, as seen in the Aftermath Life Debt novel by Chuck Wendig. From here, Solo and Organa would welcome their child, Ben, into the world, of course. Then, after years of soaring across the galaxy in his precious Millennium Falcon, Solo put these skills to good use. He actually became a racer for a time, even returning to his home planet of Corellia to race in the Gauntlet. Claudia Gray's Bloodline book also revealed that Solo ended up owning a shipping company at one point too, and ultimately managed the prestigious 5 Sabres Racing Championship in the years after the Battle of Endor. You all know what happened next. Solo and Leia would sadly separate after their sons fall to the dark side, with the former and his pal Chewbacca then going back to their smuggling ways. Number 7, Han Solo actually was a nerf-herder. While on the subject of interesting periods in Star Wars history that didn't make it onto the big screen, something that went down during the time between Episode 4 A New Hope and Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back, actually somewhat changes the way you'll look at one rather famous insult forever. Who will ever forget the moment when Leia Organa called her future hubby a stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf-herder? It turns out that there's a little bit of truth to this outburst though. After the first Death Star was destroyed, Solo and Luke Skywalker ended up taking a smuggling job to earn some cash in the Marvel's Star Wars 2015 comic series. What were they tasked with moving across the galaxy? You guessed it, nerfs. A lot of nerfs. These illegal space buffalo were crammed inside of the Millennium Falcon in the 17th issue of the comic, with Solo not exactly being happy about so many smelly animals making a mess in his ship, as they eventually delivered them to Ibar. So this does technically mean that Solo was a nerf-herder for a little while at least, though he probably didn't enjoy being reminded of the time his ship was well and truly nerfed. Number 6, his stepdad was almost in Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back. The late Lee Brackett wrote the first draft of what would later become Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back. That script included a ton of fascinating ideas that fans would ultimately never see on the big screen though, and many have never even heard of. One of the most intriguing things found on these pages was the fact Han Solo was seen being asked to track down his stepfather Ovan Marrachel in this version of the story. Why did Leia want him to go on this mission? Well, Marrachel was the leader of the Transport Guild and apparently the most powerful man in the galaxy next to the Emperor, according to Brackett's script, and Organa wanted him to join the rebellion's side in the Galactic Civil War. However, Marrachel wouldn't actually physically appear in that draft, with Han only deciding to go and find the man he didn't have the greatest relationship with towards the end of the movie. Brackett would sadly pass away due to cancer not long after turning in her draft. Lucas and Lawrence Kasdan would then rewrite the screenplay, and though some of Brackett's ideas remained, like Luke's training with Yoda known as Minch in Brackett's draft, all mentions of Marrachel disappeared, robbing the galaxy of this family reunion. Interestingly, a version of Ovan would eventually show up as Han's dad in the new canon in the end, though he would only appear in the Han Solo and Chewbacca comic series and still hasn't been shown on screen. If you've not got a bad feeling about this list right here, then why not hit that subscribe button down below for more What Culture Star Wars in your life. Number 5, his blaster was based on Winston Churchill's favourite. A number of things spring to mind when the name Han Solo is thrown into a conversation. The smuggler's cheeky grin, his ability to always deliver a killer one-liner, and of course his tried and tested weapon of choice, the DL-44 modified heavy blaster pistol. Solo would use this iconic gun to fire shots off at many a stormtrooper, and famously had it yanked right out of his hand by Darth Vader. But did you know that this smuggler's favourite weapon was actually based on another famous figure's go-to gun? That's right, none other than Winston Churchill was a big fan of the real Mauser C96 German pistol that was used to create Solo's blaster in Star Wars. To create the DL-44 seen on screen, a vintage German Hensoldt scope was added to the C96, along with a flash hider from a Mauser MG81 machine gun. And if that wasn't interesting enough for you, not only was the C96 originally used for Harrison Ford's gun also used for the Frank Sinatra starring 1967 film The Naked Runner, this World War I era pistol was also sold for over $1 million at an auction. That's an expensive gun. Number 4, he was almost in Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. Back when George Lucas was putting together the conclusion of his prequel trilogy, the creator of The Galaxy Far Far Away had an idea that would have involved a young Han Solo popping up on Kashyyyk. In an early draft of Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, Lucas had the 13-year-old Han show up on screen and deliver the line, "I found part of a transmitter droid near the East Bay. I think it's still sending and receiving signals." Not only that, it would have also been revealed that Chewbacca raised the eventual smuggler on his homeworld. He'd also say that aforementioned line to none other than Master Yoda, which would have been the first time the pair had ever interacted on the big screen. But Lucas soon wisely decided he didn't fancy dropping the original trilogy legend into the story, and scrapped the cameo as he continued scribbling, eventually revealing in Paul Duncan's The Star Wars Archives Episode 1 to 3, 1999 to 2005 book, "I rejected it after I read it. I said this is stupid, I was being a smart aleck, tying things together and being a little too clever for my own good." Number 3, Leia wasn't the only person he married, sort of. Returning to the spell between episodes 4 and 5 now, not only did the Marvel's Star Wars 2015 comic series reveal Han Solo was actually a nerf-herder, it also brought with it the surprising news of him being married to a woman called Sana Starros. Well, kind of. Before he ultimately tied the knot with Leia Organa after Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, Han and Starros pretended to get married to pull off a scam. The two were trying to execute a robbery together, but Solo would ultimately disappear with her cut. What a scoundrel. So when she reappeared in the 6th issue of that comic and confronted Solo in front of a surprised Leia, Sana was understandably not very happy. She even threatened to turn Leia over to the Empire. Hell hath no fury in all that. After eventually deciding not to hand Leia over to the Imperials though, she'd actually work alongside Solo and Organa, with a woman who can technically call herself Han's first wife, becoming an important character in her own right and also eventually starring in her own comic series in 2023 too. Number 2, he once won the planet of Dathomir in Legends. You know that spooky planet Maul calls home? The same one many a Night Sister has been seen on over the years? Well, Han Solo owned that world once. As balmy as that sounds, it's actually something that went down within the expanded universe. Solo won the deed to the planet in a game of sabacc after learning that a prince had proposed to Leia Organa. In another example of Solo being a bit awful to the women in his life, he'd then kidnap Leia and take her to his newly won world, after she'd pointed out that he had actually just been conned. That planet was in the part of the galaxy that belonged to the warlord Singe, you see. His plan to then win her over on this world didn't exactly work out too well, as Solo was soon captured by Force Witches, Night Sisters. Serves him right. Both he and Leia would eventually survive the ordeal though, and still ended up marrying in Dave Wolverton's The Courtship of Princess Leia novel, ending this somewhat surreal story on a happy note at least. Number 1, another famous Han Solo line was created by Harrison Ford. It's been mentioned 1,000,001 times over the years, so there's a good chance you've already heard the story of Harrison Ford coming up with the iconic "I know" line in Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. What you probably didn't know, however, is that the megastar was also responsible for another undeniably cool Solo response in the original trilogy. Remember that scene in the first Star Wars when Luke Skywalker blasts a TIE fighter using one of the Millennium Falcon's quad laser cannons? Well, as Mark Hamill would reveal when talking to the Russo brothers on their Pizza Film School podcast, Han Solo's brilliant reaction to him celebrating wasn't entirely scripted. After Han says, "Great kid," the addition of "Don't get cocky" was all Ford. It's a brilliant little ad-lib that took Lucas' rather dull line and made it feel like something this cocky smuggler would unquestionably say in the heat of battle. And it's just one of the many moments that help make Han Solo one of the coolest figures in the galaxy.